नमस्ते सर।
नमस्ते। मेरा फोन वो माइक म्यूट था। और सब ठीक है?
हाँ जी सर, सब ठीक है।
हरी जी पहुंच गए?
हाँ, पहुंच गए थे जी।
चलिए। सो भगवा अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो साक्षातो येन भगवता धम्मो सुपटिपन्नो यस्य भगवतो सावक संघो तमयं भगवन्तं सधम्मं ससङ्गं इमे हि सकारे यथार्हन् आरोपिते हि अभिपूजयामा साधुनो भन्ते भगवा शुचिरपरिनिभूतोऽपि पश्चिमा जनतानुकम्पमा सा मे सकारे दुगतपनाकार भूते पटिगन्हातु अम्हाकं निगृतं हिताय सुखाय अर्हन् सम्मा सम्बुद्ध भगवा बुद्धं भगवन्तं अभिवादेमि साक्षातो भगवता धम्मं नमस्सामि सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो संघं नमामि अन्मयं बुद्धस्य भगवतो उपभाग नमकारं करोमसे नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स नमो तस्स भगवतो अरहतो सम्मा सम्बुद्धस्स अन्मयं बुद्धानुसतिनायं करोमसे तं कोपन भगवन् एवं कल्याणो कीर्तिसद्दो अभुगतो इति पिसो भगवा रहन् सम्मा सम्बुद्धो विद्याचरण सम्पन्न सुगतो लोकविदु अनुत्तरो पुरुषधम्मसार सत्ता देव मनुस्सानं बुद्धो भगवति अन्नमयं बुद्धाभिगीतिं करोमसे बुद्धवारहन्तवरतादिगुण हेतु शुद्धाभिज्ञानकरुणा हि समागततो बोधेशियो सुजनतं कमलं वसुरो वन्दामहं तमरणं शिरसा जिनेन्दम् बुद्धो यो सब्बपाणिनः शरणं क्षेममुत्तमं पठमानसतिष्ठानं वन्दामि तं शिरेणः बुद्धस्मि दासो बुद्धो मे साम्यकेश्वरो बुद्धस्संनियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि बुद्धस्यैव सुबोधितं नास्ति मे शरणं अन्यः बुद्धो मे शरणं वरम् एतेन सच्चवज्जेन वन्देऽहं सत्तु शासने बुद्धं मे वन्दमानेन पुण्यं पसुतं इद सब्बेऽपि अन्तरायामि माहेशं तस्य तेजसा कायेन वाचा बुद्धेन पकड़म दो पटिगनाथ कालांतरे स्मरितुमस्मि। वयं धम्मानुसतिनायं करोमसि साक्षातो भगवता धम्मो सन्दिट्ठिको अकालिको एहि पस्सिको पनैको पच्चत्तं वेदितव्यो विඤ्ඤुहि अन्नमयं धम्मविगीतिं करोमसि स्वाकातातिगुणयोगवसे सेयो यो मग्गपाकपर्यतिविमुखभेदो सम्मुखलोकपतन तव धारि धारि वन्दामहं तमहरं हरधम्ममेतं धम्मो सब्बपाणिनं शरणं केममुत्तमम् द्वितीयानुसतिष्ठानं वन्दामि तं शिवेन धम्मस्सहं नियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि I think एक लाइन छूट गई। धम्मस्सस्मि दासो वा धम्मो मे सामि किस्सरो धम्मस्सहं नियादेमि शरीरं जीवितं चिदं वन्दन्तोऽहं चरिष्यामि धम्मस्येव सुधम्मतम् नास्ति मे शरणं अन्यं धम्मो मे शरणं वरम् एतेन सच्चवज्जेन वन्देयं सत्तु शासने धम्मं मे वन्दमानेन यं पुण्यं पसुतं यदा सब्बेऽपि अन्तरायामि माहेशं तस्य तेजसा ऐनवचोचित्सा धम्मे कुकं पकटमयाय धम्मो पटिगनाथो चेन्तं कालान्तरे संवरितं धम्मे अन्नमयं संघानुसतिनायं करोमसे सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो उजुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो सामि न्यायपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो तामीचि पटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो यदिदं चत्तारि पुरुषयुगा अट्ठपुरुषपुङ्गला येषु भगवतो सावक संघो आहुने पाहुनेयो दक्षिणे अंजलि करणीय अनुत्तरं पुण्यकेतन लोकसाति अन्वयं संघानुगीतिं करोमसे सद्धम्मजो सुपटिपति गुणातियुतो यो अट्ठविधो अरियपुङ्ग सङ्गसेठो शीलादिधम्मपवर सयकाय चित्तो वन्दामहं तमरिया निगणं सुशुद्धं संघो यो सब्बपाणिनं शरणं खेममुत्तमं ततीयानुसतिष्ठानं වන්දාමි තම් සිරේනං සංඝස්සස්මි දාසෝ සංඝෝ මේ සාමි කිස්සරෝ සංඝස්සහං නියාදේමි ශරීරං ජීවිතං චිදං වන්දන්තෝ හංචරස්සාමි සංඝස්සෝ පටිපන්නතං නත්ති මේ සරණං අඤ්ඤං සංඝෝ මේ සරණං වරං ඒතේන සච්ච වජ්ජේන වණ්ඩේයං සත්තු සාසනේ සංඝං මේ වන්දමානේන පුඤ්ඤං පසුතම් එදා සබ්බේපි අන්තරායාමි මාහේසුම් තස්ස තේජසා කායේන වචා චිත්සා සංඝේ උපමං පක්ඨම සංඝෝ පටිඝනාතෝ චින්ත කාන්තරේ සම්බරිතම සංඝේ अब रतन सूत्र का पाठ होगा।
සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්ස නමෝ තස්ස භගවතු අරහතෝ සම්මා සම්බුද්දස්ස යානිධ භූතානි සමාගතානි භුම්මානි වායා නිවේ අන්තලික්ඛේ සබ්බේව භූතා සුමනා භවන්තු අතෝපි සක්කච්ච සුනන්තු භාසිතං තස්මාහි භූතානි සාමේත සබ්බේ මෙත්තං කරෝත මානුසියා පජාය දිවාච රත්තෝ චරන්ති ඒ බලින් තස්මාහිනේරක්ඛත අප්පමත්තා යංකින්චිවිත් තං ඉදවා පුරංවා සග්ගේ සුවායං රතනං පනීතං නනෝ සමංගත්ති තථාගතේන ඉදම්පි බුද්ධේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්ච සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු khයං විරාගං අමෙතං පනීතං යදජ්ජගාසක්්‍ය මුනි සමාහිතෝ නතේන ධම්මේන සමත්ති කිංචි ඉදම්පි ධම්මේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු යං බුද්ධ සෙට්ඨෝ පරිවන්නයි සුචින් සමාධිමානං තයිකඤ්ඤ මාහෝ සමාධිනාතේන සමෝන විච්ඡති ඉදම්පි ධම්මේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු යේ පුග්ගලාට්ඨ සතම්ප සත්තා චත්තාරියේතානි යුගානි හොන්ති තේ දක්ඛිනේයා සුගතස්ස සාවකා ඒතේසු දින්නානි මහප්පලානි ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු යේ සුප්පයුත්තා මනසාදල්හේන නික්කාමිනෝ ගෝතම සාසනම්හි තේ පත්තිපත්තා අමතං විඝයිහ ලද්දා මුධානි බුද්ධින් ගුංජමා ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු යතින්ද කීලෝ පටවිංසිතෝසියා චතුබ්බි වාතේභි අසම්පඛම්පියෝ තතෝපමං සප්පුරිසං වදාමි යෝ අරිය සච්ඡානි අවෙච්ච පස්සති ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු යේ අරිය සච්ඡානි විභාවයන්ති ගම්භීර පඤ්ඤේන සුදේසිතානි කිංචාපිතේ හොන්ති බුසප්ප මත්තා නතේ භවං අට්ඨ මංආදියන්ති ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනීතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු සහවස්ස දස්සන සම්පදාය තයස්සු ධම්මා ජහිතා භවන්ති සක්ක සක්කාය දිට්ඨි විචිකිච්ඡිතං ච සීලබ්බතං වා පියදස්සි කිංචි චතුහපායේ ච විප්පමුත්තෝ චචාභිඨානානි අබබ්බෝකාතුම් ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනිතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු කිංචාපිසෝ කම්මං කරෝති පාපකං කායේන වාචා උදචේතසාවා අභබ්බෝ සෝතස්ස පටිච්චාදාය අභබ්බතාදිට්ඨ පදස්ස උත්තා ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනිතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු වනප්පගුම්බේ යත පුස්සිතග්ගේ ගිම්හාන මාසේ පටමස්මින් ගිම්හි තතෝපමං ධම්ම වරං අදේසයි නිබ්බාන ගාමින් පරමං හිතාය ඉදම්පි බුද්ධේ රතනං පනිතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු වරෝරඤ්ඤෝ වරදෝ වරහරෝ අනුත්තරෝ ධම්ම වරං අදේසයි ඉදම්පි බුද්ධේ රතනං පනිතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු කීනං පුරාණං නවං නත්ති සම්භවං විරත්ත චිත්තා ආයතිකේ භවස්මින් තේකීන බීජා අවිරුල්ලිච්ඡන්දා නිබ්බන්ති ධීරා යතා යම්පදීපෝ ඉදම්පි සංඝේ රතනං පනිතං ඒතේන සච්චේන සුවත්ති හෝතු Yani debutani samagatani Bhummani vaya nive antalikhe Tathagatam deve manusse pujitam Buddhang namasame suatti hotu Yani debutani samagatani Bhummani vaya nive antalikhe Tathagatam deve manusse pujitam Dhammang namasame suatti hotu Yani debutani samagatani Anivaya nive antalikhe Tathagatam deve manusse pujitam Sangham namasame suatti hotu Etene sacce vajjene dukkha upasamintute Etene sacce vajjene bhaya upasamintute Etene sacce vajjene Roga upasamintute
प्रवचन सुनेंगे. We'll listen to the second part of the discourse which we had listened yesterday. Was titled Suffering on the Road.
To see impermanence in this way, it won't be long before you gain insight. Each provides a necessary tool to be used in developing meditation, but it's up to each individual to discover skillful ways to make use of them. Someone with a lot of wisdom can gain insight easily. Someone with little wisdom gains insight with difficulty. Someone without any wisdom won't gain any insight. Two different people might be following the same way of cultivating the mind, but whether they actually gain insight into the Dhamma will depend on the amount of wisdom each has. If you go to observe and train with different teachers, you must use wisdom to put what you see into perspective. How does this Ajahn do it? What's that Ajahn style like? You watch them closely, but that's as far as it goes. It's all just watching and judging on the external level. It's just looking at their behavior and way of doing things on the surface. If you simply observe things on this level, you'll never stop doubting. Why does that teacher do it this way? Why does this teacher do it another way? In that monastery, the teacher gives lots of talks. Why does the teacher in this monastery give so few talks? In that other monastery, the teacher doesn't even give any talks at all. It's just crazy when the mind proliferates endlessly, comparing and speculating about all the different teachers. In the end, you simply wind yourself up into a mess. You must turn your attention inward and cultivate for yourself. The correct thing to do is focus internally on your own training, as this is how right practice, Samapatipada, develops. You simply observe different teachers and learn from their example, but then you have to do it yourself. If you contemplate at this more subtle level, all that doubting will stop. There was one senior monk who didn't spend a lot of time thinking and reflecting about things. He didn't give much importance to thoughts about the past or the future, because he wouldn't let his attention move away from the mind itself. He watched intently what was arising in his awareness in the present moment. Observing the mind's changing behavior and different reactions as it experienced things, he wouldn't attach importance to any of it, repeating the teaching to himself, "It's uncertain, it's not a sure thing." If you can teach yourself to see impermanence in this way, it won't be long before you gain insight into the Dhamma. In fact, you don't have to run after the proliferating mind. Really, it just moves around on its own enclosed circuit. It spins around in circles. This is the way that your mind works. It's samsara vata, the endless cycle of birth and death. This completely encircles the mind. If you tried pursuing the mind as it spins around, would you be able to catch it? It moves so fast. Would you even be able to keep up with it? Try chasing after it and see what happens. What you need to do is stand still at one point and let the mind spin around the circuit by itself. Imagine the mind as a mechanical doll which was able to run around. If it began running faster and faster until it was running at full speed, you wouldn't be able to run fast enough to keep up with it. But actually, you wouldn't need to run anywhere. You could just stand still in one place and let the doll do the running. If you were to stand still in the middle of the circuit without chasing after it, you'd be able to see the doll every time it ran past you and completed a lap. In fact, if you did try running after it, the more you tried to chase after and catch it, the more it would be able to elude you. So, as far as going on Tudong is concerned, I both encourage it and discourage it at the same time. If the practitioner already has some wisdom in the way of training, there should be no problem. However, there was one monk I knew who didn't see it as necessary to go on Tudong into the forest. He didn't see Tudong as a matter of traveling anywhere. Having thought about it, he decided to stay and train in the monastery, vowing to undertake 3 of the Dhutanga practices and keep them strictly, without going anywhere. He felt it wasn't necessary to make himself tired walking long distances with the heavy weight of his monk's alms bowl, robes, and other requisites slung over his shoulder. His way was quite a valid one too. But if you really had a strong desire to go out wandering about the forests and hills on Tudong, you wouldn't find his style very satisfying. In the end, if you have clear insight into the truth of things, you only need to hear one word of the teaching, and that'll bring you deep and penetrating insight. Another example I could mention is that a young novice I once encountered wanted to practice living in a cemetery, completely alone. As he was still more or less a child, hardly into his teens, I was quite concerned for his well-being and kept an eye on him to see how he was doing. In the morning he would go an alms round in the village and afterwards bring his food back to the cremation ground where he would eat his meal alone, surrounded by the pits where the corpses of those who hadn't been burned were buried. Every night he would sleep quite alone next to the remains of the dead. After I'd been staying nearby for about a week, I went along to check and see how he was. On the outside, he seemed at ease with himself, so I asked him, "So, you're not afraid staying here then?" "No, I'm not afraid," he replied. "How come you're not frightened?" "Well, it seems to me unlikely that there's anything much to be afraid of." All it needed was this one simple reflection for the mind to stop proliferating. That novice didn't need to think about all sorts of different things that would merely complicate the matter. He was cured straight away. His fear vanished. You should try meditating in this way. I say that whatever you're doing, whether standing, walking, coming or going, if you sustain mindfulness without giving up, your samadhi won't deteriorate. It won't decline. If there's too much food, you say that it's suffering and just trouble. What's all the fuss about? If there's a lot, just take a small amount and leave the rest for everybody else. Why make so much trouble for yourself over this? It's not peaceful. What's not peaceful? Just take a small portion and give the rest away. But if you're attached to the food and feel bad about giving it up to others, then of course you'll find things difficult. If you're fussy and you want to have a taste of this and a taste of that, but not so much of something else, you'll find that in the end you've chosen so much food that you've filled the bowl to the point where none of it tastes very delicious anyway. So you end up attaching to the view that being offered a lot of food is just distracting and a load of trouble. Why get so distracted and upset? It's you who are letting yourself get stirred up by the food. Does the food itself ever get distracted and upset? It's ridiculous. You are getting all worked up over nothing. When there are a lot of people coming to the monastery, you say, it's disturbing. Where's the disturbance? Actually, following the daily routine and the ways of training is fairly straightforward. You don't have to make a big deal out of this. You go an alms round, come back and eat the meal. You do any necessary business and chores, training yourself with mindfulness, just get on with things. You make sure you don't miss out on the various parts of the monastic routine. When you do the evening chanting, does your cultivation of mindfulness really collapse? If simply doing the morning and evening chanting causes your meditation to fall apart, it surely shows that you haven't really learned to meditate anyway. In the daily meetings, the bowing, chanting praise to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and everything else you do are extremely wholesome activities. So can they really be the cause for your samadhi to degenerate? If you think that it's distracting going to meetings, look again. It's not the meetings that are distracting and unpleasant, it's you. If you let unskillful thinking stir you up, then everything becomes distracting and unpleasant. Even if you don't go to the meetings, you end up just as distracted and stirred up. You have to learn how to reflect wisely and keep your mind in a wholesome state. Everybody gets caught into such states of confusion and agitation, particularly those who are new to the training. What actually happens is that you allow your mind to go out and interfere with all these things and stir itself up. When you come to train with a monastic community, determine for yourself just to stay there and keep practicing. Whether other people are training in the correct way or the wrong way is their business. Keep putting effort into the training, following the monastic guidelines and helping each other with any useful advice you can offer. Anyone who isn't happy training here is free to go elsewhere. If you want to stay, then go ahead and get on with the practice. It has an extremely beneficial effect on the community if there is one of the group who is self-contained and solidly training himself. The other monks around will start to notice and take example from the good aspects of that monk's behavior. They will observe him and ask themselves how it is that he manages to maintain a sense of ease and calm while training himself in mindfulness. The good example provided by that monk is one of the most beneficial things he can do for his fellow beings. If you're a junior member of a monastic community, training with a daily routine and keeping to rules about the way things are done, you have to follow the lead of the senior monks and keep putting effort into the routine. Whatever the activity is, you do it. When it's time to stop, you finish. You say those things that are appropriate and useful and train yourself to refrain from speech that is inappropriate and harmful. Don't allow that kind of speech to slip out. There's no need to take lots of food at the mealtime. Just take a few things and leave the rest. When you see that there's a lot of food, the tendency is to indulge and start picking a little of this and trying a little of that. And that way you end up eating everything that's been offered. When you hear the invitation, please take some of this, Ajahn. Please take some of that, Venerable. If you're not careful, it'll just stir up the mind. The thing to do is to let go. Why get involved with it? You think that it's the food stirring you up, but the real root of the problem is that you let the mind go out and meddle with the food. If you can reflect and see this, you should make life a lot easier. The problem is you don't have enough wisdom. You don't have enough insight to see how the process of cause and effect works. Actually, when I was on the road in the past, when it was necessary, I was even prepared to stay in one of the village or city monasteries. In the course of your travels, when you're alone and have to pass through different monastic communities that have varying standards of training and discipline, recite the verse to yourself, Suddhi Asuddhi Pachyutang. The purity or impurity of one's virtue is something one knows for oneself. Chant this both as a protection and as a guideline for reflection. You might end up having to rely on your own integrity in this way. When you're moving through an area you haven't been to before, you might have to make a choice over the place you're going to stay for the night. The Buddha taught that monks and nuns should live in peaceful places. So, depending on what's available, you should try and find a peaceful place to stay and meditate. If you can't find a really quiet place, you can, as second best, at least find a place where you're able to be at peace internally. So, if for some reason it's necessary to stay in a certain place, you must learn how to live there peacefully, without letting craving overcome the mind. If you then decide to leave that monastery or forest, don't leave because of craving. Similarly, if you're staying somewhere, don't stay there because of craving. Understand what's motivating your thinking and actions. It's true that the Buddha advised monastics to lead a lifestyle and find living conditions that are conducive to peace and suitable for meditation, but how will you cope on those occasions when you can't find a peaceful place? In the end, the whole thing could just drive you crazy. Where will you go next? Stay right where you are. Stay put and learn to live in peace. Train yourself until you're able to stay and meditate in the place you are in. The Buddha taught that you should know and understand proper time and place according to conditions. He didn't encourage monks and nuns to roam about all over the place without any real purpose. Certainly, he recommended that we find a suitable quiet place, but if that's not possible, it might be necessary to spend a few weeks or a few months in a place that isn't so quiet or suitable. What would you do then? You'd probably just die from the shock of it. So learn to know your own mind and know your intentions. In the end, traveling around from place to place is only that much. When you move on somewhere else, you tend to find more of the same of what you left behind, and you're always doubting about what might lie ahead at the next place. Then, before you know it, you could find yourself with malaria or some other unpleasant illness, and you have to find a doctor to treat you, give you drugs and injections. In no time at all, your mind will be more agitated and distracted than ever. Actually, the secret to successful meditation is to bring your way of viewing things in line with the Dhamma. The important thing is to establish right view, samadhi, in the mind. It isn't anything more complicated than that, but you have to keep putting forth effort to investigate and seek out the correct way for yourself. Naturally, this involves some difficulty because you still lack maturity of wisdom and understanding. So, what do you think you'll do? Try giving Tudong a go and see what happens. You might get fed up with wandering about again. It's never a sure thing. Or maybe you're thinking that if you really get into the meditation, you won't want to go on Tudong because the whole proposition will seem uninteresting. But that perception is uncertain. You might feel totally bored with the idea of going on Tudong, but that can always change, and it might not be too long before you start wanting to go off, moving about again. Or you might just want to stay out on Tudong indefinitely and continue to wander from place to place with no time limits or any fixed destination in mind. Again, it's uncertain. This is what you have to reflect upon as you meditate. Go against the flow of your desires. You might attach to the view that you'll go on Tudong for certain, or you might attach to the view that you'll stay put in a monastery for certain. But either way, you're getting caught in delusion. You're attaching to fixed views in the wrong way. Go and investigate this for yourself. I've already contemplated this from my own experience, and I'm explaining the way it is as simply and directly as I can. So, listen to what I'm saying, and then observe and contemplate for yourself. This really is the way things are. In the end, you'll be able to see the truth of this whole matter for yourself. Then, once you do have insight into the truth, whatever decision you make will be accompanied by right view and in accordance with Dhamma. Whatever you decide to do, whether to go on Tudong or to stay at the monastery, you must wisely reflect first. It isn't that you're forbidden from going off wandering in the forest or going to find quiet places to meditate. If you do go off walking, really make a go of it and walk until you're worn out and ready to drop. Test yourself to the limits of your physical and mental endurance. In the old days, as soon as I caught sight of the mountains, I'd feel elated and be inspired to take off. Nowadays, when I see them, the body starts moaning just at the sight of them, and all I want to do is turn around and go back to the monastery. There's not much enthusiasm for all that anymore. Before, I'd really be happy to live up in the mountains. I even thought I'd spend my whole life living up there. The Buddha taught to be mindful of what's arising in the present moment. Know the truth of the way things are in the present moment. These are the teachings he left you, and they are correct. But your own thoughts and views are still not correctly in line with the Dhamma, and that's why you continue to suffer. So, try out Tudong if it seems like the right thing to do. See what it's like moving around from place to place and how that affects your mind. I don't want to forbid you from going on Tudong, but I don't want to give you permission either. Do you understand my meaning? I neither want to prevent you nor allow you to go. But I'll share with you some of my experience. If you do go on Tudong, use the time to benefit your meditation. Don't just go like a tourist, having fun traveling around. These days it looks like more and more monks and nuns go on Tudong to indulge in a bit of sensual enjoyment and adventure rather than to really benefit their own spiritual training. If you do go, then really make a sincere effort to use the Dhutanga practices to wear away the defilements. Even if you stay in the monastery, you can take up these Dhutanga practices. These days, what they call Tudong tends to be more of a time for seeking excitement and stimulation than training in the 13 Dhutanga practices. If you go off like that, you're just lying to yourself when you call it Tudong. It's an imaginary Tudong. Tudong can actually be something that supports and enhances your meditation. When you go, you should really do it. Contemplate what is the true purpose and meaning of going on Tudong. If you do go, I encourage you to use the experience as an opportunity to learn and further your meditation, not just waste time. I won't let monks go off if they're not ready yet for it. But if someone is sincere and seriously interested in the practice, I won't stop them. When you're planning to go off, it's worth asking yourself these questions and reflecting on them first. Staying up in the mountains can be a useful experience. I used to do it myself. In those days, I'd have to get up really early in the morning because the houses where I went on alms round were such a long way away. I might have to go up and down an entire mountain, and sometimes the walk was so long and arduous that I wouldn't be able to get there and back in time to eat the meal at my camp before midday. If you compare it with the way things are these days, you can see that maybe it's not actually necessary to go to such lengths and put yourself through so much hardship. It might actually be more beneficial to go on alms round to one of the villages near the monastery here, return to eat the meal, and have lots of energy left in reserve to put forth effort in the formal practice. That's if you're training yourself sincerely. But if you're just into taking it easy and like to go straight back to your hut for a sleep after the meal, that isn't the correct way to go. In the days when I was on Tudong, I might have to leave my camp at the crack of dawn and use up much of my energy just in the walk across the mountains. Even then, I might be so pushed for time, I'd have to eat my meal in the middle of the forest somewhere before getting back. Reflecting on it now, I wonder if it's worth putting oneself into all that bother. It might be better to find a place to practice where the alms route to the local village is not too long or difficult, which would allow you to save your energy for formal meditation. By the time you've cleaned up and are back at your hut, ready to continue meditating, that monk up in the mountains would still be stuck out in the forest without even having begun to eat his meal. Views on the best way of practice can differ. Sometimes you actually have to experience some suffering before you can have insight into suffering and know it for what it is. Tudong can have its advantages, and I neither criticize those who stay in the monastery nor those who go off on Tudong, if their aim is to progress in training themselves. I don't praise monks just because they stay in the monastery, nor do I praise monks simply because they go off on Tudong either. Those who really deserve praise are the ones with right view. If you stay in the monastery, it should be for cultivating the mind. If you go off, it should be for cultivating the mind. The meditation and training goes wrong when you go off with the group of friends you're attached to, only interested in having a good time together and getting involved in foolish pursuits. So then there's some questions and answers to complete this. What do you have to say about the way of training? What do you think about what I have been saying? What do you think you'll decide to do in the future then? So one monk responds, I'd like to ask for some teaching about the suitability of different meditation objects for different temperaments. For a long time now, I've tried calming the mind by focusing attention on the breathing in conjunction with reciting the meditation word Buddho. But I've never become very peaceful. I've tried contemplating death, but that hasn't helped calm the mind down either. Reflecting on the 5 aggregates hasn't worked either. So I've finally exhausted all my wisdom. Ajahn Chah responds, just let go. If you've exhausted all your wisdom, you must let go. He responds, as soon as I begin to experience a little bit of calm during sitting meditation, a multitude of memories and thoughts immediately springs up and disturbs the mind. Ajahn Chah responds, that's just the point. It's uncertain. Teach yourself that it's not certain. Sustain this reflection on impermanence as you meditate. Every single sense object and mental state that you experience is impermanent, without exception. Keep this reflection present in the mind constantly. In the course of meditation, reflect that the distracted mind is uncertain. When the mind does become calm with samadhi, it's uncertain, just the same. The reflection on impermanence is the thing that you should really hold on to. You don't need to give too much importance to anything else. Don't get involved with the things that arise in the mind. Let go. Even if you're peaceful, you don't need to think about it too much. Don't take it too seriously. Don't take it too seriously if you're not peaceful either. Vinyanang anicang. Have you ever read that anywhere? It means sense consciousness is impermanent. Have you ever heard that before? How should you train yourself in relationship to this truth? How should you contemplate when you find that both peaceful and agitated mind states are transient? The important thing is to sustain awareness of the way things are. In other words, know that both the calm mind and the distracted mind are uncertain. Once you know this, how will you view things? Once this understanding is implanted in the mind, whenever you experience peaceful states, you know that they are transient. And when you experience agitated states, you know that they are transient also. Do you know how to meditate with this kind of awareness and insight? The monk responds, I don't know. Ajahn Chah replies, investigate impermanence. How many days can those tranquil mental states really last? Sitting meditation with a distracted mind is uncertain. When the meditation brings good results and the mind enters a state of calm, that's also uncertain. This is where insight comes. What's there left for you to attach to? Keep following up on what's happening in the mind. As you investigate, keep questioning and prodding, probing deeper and deeper into the nature of impermanence. Sustain your mindfulness right at this point. You don't have to go anywhere else. In no time at all, the mind will calm down just as you want it to. The reason practicing with the meditation word buddho doesn't make the mind peaceful, or practicing mindfulness of breathing doesn't make the mind peaceful, is because you're attaching to the distracted mind. When reciting buddho, or concentrating on the breath and the mind still hasn't calmed down, reflect on uncertainty and don't get too involved with whether the state of mind is peaceful or not. Even if you enter a state of calm, don't get too involved with it, because it can delude you and cause you to attach too much meaning and importance to that state. You have to use some wisdom when dealing with the deluded mind. When it's calm, you simply acknowledge the fact and take it as a sign that the meditation is going in the right direction. If the mind isn't calm, you simply acknowledge the reality that the mind is confused and distracted. But there's nothing to be gained from refusing to accept the truth and trying to struggle against it. When the mind is peaceful, you can be aware that it's peaceful, but remind yourself that any peaceful state is uncertain. When the mind is distracted, you observe the lack of peace and know that it is just that. The distracted state of mind is equally as prone to change as a peaceful one. If you've established this kind of insight, the attachment to the sense of self collapses as soon as you begin to confront it and investigate. When the mind is agitated, the moment you begin to reflect on the uncertainty of that state, the sense of self is blown up out of attachment and begins to deflate. It tilts to one side like an inflatable boat that's been punctured. As the air rushes out of the boat, it starts to capsize, and similarly, the sense of self collapses. Try it out for yourself. The trouble is that usually you fail to catch your deluded thinking fast enough. As it arises, the sense of self immediately forms around the mental agitation, but as soon as you reflect on its changing nature, the attachment collapses. Try looking at this for yourself. Keep questioning and examining deeper and deeper into the nature of attachment. Normally, you fail to stop and question the agitation in the mind, but you must be patient and feel your way. Let the agitated proliferation run its course, and then, slowly, continue to feel your way. You're more used to not examining it, so you must be determined to focus attention on it. Be firm, and don't give it any space to stay in the mind. But when I give talks, you usually burst out complaining in frustration. All this old Ajahn ever talks about is impermanence and the changing nature of things. From the first moment, you can't stand hearing it, and you want to flee somewhere else. Luang Por only has one teaching, that everything is uncertain. If you are truly fed up with this teaching, you should go off and pursue your meditation until you develop enough insight to bring some real confidence and certainty to your mind. Go ahead and give it a go. In no time at all, you'll probably be back here again. So try to commit these teachings to memory and store them in your heart. Then go ahead and try out wandering about on Tudong. If you don't come to understand and see the truth in the way I've explained it, you'll find little peace. Wherever you are, you won't be at ease within yourself. You won't be able to find anywhere that you can really meditate at all. I agree that doing a lot of formal meditation to develop samadhi is a good thing. Are you familiar with the terms Ceto Vimutti, meaning liberation of the heart, and Panya Vimutti, meaning liberation through wisdom? Do you understand the meaning of them? Vimutti means liberation from the mental taints, the asava. There are two ways the mind can gain liberation. Ceto Vimutti refers to liberation that comes after samadhi has been developed and perfected to its most powerful and refined level. Practitioner first develops the ability to suppress the defilements completely through the power of samadhi, and then turns to the development of insight to finally gain liberation. Panya Vimutti means release from the outflows, where the practitioner develops samadhi to a level where the mind is completely one-pointed and firm enough to support and sustain insight, which then takes the lead in cutting through the defilements. These two kinds of liberation are comparable to different kinds of trees. Some species of tree grow and flourish with frequent watering. Others can die if you give them too much water. With those trees, you only need to give them a small amount of water, just enough to keep them going. Some species of pine are like that. If you overwater them, they just die. You only need to give them a little water once in a while. Strange, isn't it? Look at this pine tree. It appears so dry and parched that you wonder how it manages to grow. Think about it. Where does it get the water it needs to survive and produce those big, lush branches? Other kinds of trees would need much more water to grow to a similar size. Then there are those kinds of plants that they put into pots and hang up in different places with the roots dangling in midair. You think they just die, but very quickly the leaves grow longer and longer with hardly any water at all. If they were just the ordinary kinds of plants that grow on the ground, they'd probably just shrivel up. It's the same with these two kinds of release. Do you see it? It's just that they naturally differ in this way. Vimutti means liberation. Ceto vimutti is liberation that comes from the strength of mind that has been trained in samadhi to the maximum level. It's like those trees that need lots of water to flourish. The other kinds of trees only need a small amount of water. With too much water, they just die. It's their nature to grow and thrive, requiring only small amounts of water. So the Buddha taught that there are two kinds of liberation from the defilements, Ceto vimutti and Panya vimutti. To gain liberation, it requires both wisdom and the power of samadhi. Is there any difference between samadhi and wisdom? The bhikkhu responds, no. Lumpur answers, why do they give them different names? Why is there this split between Ceto vimutti and Panya vimutti? It's just a verbal distinction. That's right. Do you see it? If you don't see this, you can very easily go running around labeling and making such distinctions and even get so carried away that you start to lose your grip on reality. Actually, though, each of these two kinds of liberation does have a slightly different emphasis. It wouldn't be correct to say that they were exactly the same, but they aren't two different things either. Am I correct if I answer in this way? I'll say that these two things are neither exactly the same nor different. This is the way I answer the question. You must take what I've said away with you and reflect on it. Talking about the speed and fluency of mindfulness makes me think of the time I was wandering alone and having come across an old abandoned monastery in the course of my travels. I set up my umbrella and mosquito net to camp there and practice meditation for a few days. In the grounds of the monastery there were many fruit trees, the branches of which were laden with ripe fruit. I really wanted to eat some, but I didn't dare because I was afraid that the trees were the property of the monastery and I hadn't received permission to take any. Later on, a villager came by with a basket and seeing that I was staying there, asked me for permission to pick the fruit. Perhaps they asked me because they thought that I was the owner of the trees. Reflecting on it, I saw that I had no real authority to give them permission to take the fruit, but that if I forbade them, they would criticize me as being possessive and stingy with the monastery's fruit trees. Either way, there would be some harmful results. So I replied to the layperson, even though I'm staying in this monastery, I'm not the owner of the trees. I understand you want some of the fruit. I won't forbid you from taking any, but I won't give you permission either. So it's up to you. That's all it needed. They didn't take any. Speaking in this way was actually quite useful. I didn't forbid them, but I didn't give them permission either. So there was no sense of being burdened by the matter. This was the wise way to deal with such a situation. I was able to keep one step ahead of them. Speaking that way produced good results then, and it's still a useful way of speaking to this day. Sometimes if you speak to people in this unusual manner, it's enough to make them wary of doing something wrong. What do they mean by temperament, charita? Bhikkhu responds, temperament? I'm not sure how to answer that. Lumpur replies, the mind is one thing, temperament is another, and the wisdom faculty another. So, how do you train with this? Contemplate them. How do they talk about them? There is the person of lustful temperament, hateful temperament, deluded temperament, intelligent temperament, and so on. Temperament is determined by those mental states within which the mind attaches and conceals itself most often. For some people it's lust, for others it's aversion. Actually, these are all just verbal descriptions of the characteristics of the mind, but they can be clearly distinguished from each other. So, you've been a monk for 6 years already. You've probably been running after your thoughts and moods long enough. You've already been chasing them for many years. There are quite a few monks who want to go and live alone, and I've got nothing against it. If you want to live alone, then give it a go. If you're living in a community, stick with it. Neither is wrong, if you don't reflect in the wrong way. If you're living alone and caught into wrong thinking, that'll prevent you from benefiting from the experience. The most appropriate kind of place for practicing meditation is somewhere quiet and peaceful. But when a suitably peaceful place is not available, if you're not careful, your meditation practice will just die. You'll find yourself in trouble. So be careful not to scatter your energy and awareness by seeking out too many different teachers. different techniques, or places to meditate. Gather together your thoughts and focus your energy. Turn attention inwards and sustain awareness on the mind itself. Use these teachings to observe and investigate the mind over a long period of time. Don't discard them. Keep them with you as a subject for reflection. Look at what I've been saying about all conditioned things being subject to change. Impermanence is something to investigate over time. It won't take long before you gain clear insight into it. One teaching a senior monk gave me when I was new to meditation that has stuck with me simply is to go ahead and train the mind. The important thing is not to get caught up in doubting. That's enough for now. Anyone? And this is the 55th talk in the
इसका अनुवाद करते हैं। जहाँ तक कल किया था उससे आगे अनुवाद करते हैं। आपको वास्तव में प्रपंच वाले मन के पीछे भागने की जरूरत नहीं है। वो क्योंकि चलता है तो एक प्रपंच जो है एक ही वृत्त में घूमता रहता है। उसी तरह जैसे गुड़ियाएं होती है जो घूमती रहती हैं चारों तरफ से। अब आप उनको पकड़ के उनके पीछे पकड़ के घूम के पकड़ने लगो तो नहीं कर पाओगे। आप एक जगह खड़े रहो, अपने आप घूमते घूमते आपके सामने हर बार आती रहेंगी और धीरे धीरे थक के रुक जाएंगी। तो मन भी बिल्कुल ऐसा ही है। आपको कुछ उसके पीछे दौड़ने की जरूरत नहीं। आप शांत बैठे रहो, धीरे धीरे वो अपने आप शांत हो जाएगा। जहाँ तक टुडोंग पे जाने का सवाल है, मैं एनकरेज भी करता हूँ और डिस्करेज भी करता हूँ। वो डिपेंड करता है कि प्रैक्टिशनर की क्या स्थिति है। अगर उसमें पहले कुछ प्रज्ञा है, समझ है कि कैसे के साथ ट्रेनिंग करनी है तो कोई दिक्कत नहीं है। लेकिन ऐसे भी मैंने मॉन्क देखे थे जो उनको नहीं लगता था कि टुडोंग में जंगल में जाने की जरूरत है। वो सोचते थे कि इतना सामान उठा के घूमते रहो, मुझे क्या करना घूमने फिरने से। मैं अपने मोनास्ट्री में रह के ही जो टुडोंग के नियम है उनमें से 2-3 नियम उसने रखे और उनको स्ट्रिक्टली फॉलो किया। तो वो भी ठीक ही है। जैसा जिसको ठीक लगे वैसा उसे करना चाहिए। क्योंकि टुडोंग जो है वो घूमने फिरने सैर सपाटे के लिए नहीं है, वो साधना करने के लिए है। और अंततः तो अगर आप में अंतर्दृष्टि स्पष्ट हो गई है तो धर्म का एक शब्द सुनना ही काफी होता है और आपको गहरी साधना में पहुंच जाते हैं। एक और उदाहरण मैं आपके सामने दूंगा कि एक नवयुवक सामनेरा का जो कि शमशान में अकेले ध्यान करना चाहता था। क्योंकि बहुत बिल्कुल छोटा था, कभी एक टीन्स में ही था, तो मुझे उसकी काफी ख्याल रहता था कि वो क्या कर रहा है। वो सुबह भोजन आर्म्स राउंड में जाके भोजन लेके और फिर शमशान में जाके वहाँ पे जहाँ पे गड्ढे खोदे होते हैं जिसमें कॉप्सेस को लाना है, वहीं बैठ के खाना खाता था और वहीं रात को वहीं पे भी सोता था। तो एक बार मैंने जाके सोचा कि देख आऊँ सब ठीक तो है। तो उससे पूछा मैंने, तुम्हें यार अकेले डर नहीं लगता? तो कहा नहीं, डरने लगता नहीं हूँ। तो कहते क्यों नहीं डर लगता? कहते यहाँ पे मुझे ऐसा लगता नहीं कोई डरने की चीज़ है। तो जब उसको एक इतनी सी छोटी सी बात उसके स्पष्ट समझ में आ गई कि यहाँ डरने की कोई चीज़ नहीं है, तो उसको कोई प्रपंच में दौड़ता ही नहीं था। तो हमको इसी तरह से समझदारी से ध्यान करना चाहिए। मैं तो ये कहूँगा कि जो भी आप करें, बैठे खड़े हुए चलें, अगर आप अपनी सती को सजगता को बनाए रखें, आपकी समाधि भी कम नहीं होगी। कभी ये भ्रम है कि समाधि हमारी उस तरह से कम हो जाती है। कई बार आप कहते हैं बहुत ज़्यादा फूड खाना होता है तो उससे परेशानी होती है। क्या परेशानी है इसमें? जितना आपको खाना खा लो, जो बाकी है वो बचा वो रख दो, बाकी लोग खा लेंगे। उसमें पीसफुल ना होने की क्या बात है? हाँ, अगर आप भोजन से अटैच्ड हैं तो फिर आपको छोड़ने में दिक्कत हो रही है तो प्रॉब्लम अलग है। अगर आप में स्वाद का बहुत इच्छा रहती है स्वादिष्ट भोजन करने की, तो आप थोड़ा इसका भी टेस्ट करेंगे, थोड़ा उसका भी करेंगे, तो अंततः तो बहुत भोजन हो ही जाएगा। भोजन का ज़्यादा होना या कम होना डिस्ट्रैक्शन नहीं है। डिस्ट्रैक्शन तो हम करते हैं अपने भोजन के प्रति व्यवहार की तरह। इसी तरह जब बहुत लोग मोनेस्ट्री में आ रहे हैं तो आपको तो बहुत डिस्टर्बेंस हो रही है। तो क्या डिस्टर्बेंस हो रही है भाई? जो आपका रूटीन है आप उसको करते रहो। इसको आपको लोगों के आने या जाने को कोई महत्व देने की जरूरत ही नहीं है। आप चार्टर में गए, भोजन लाया, आपने चुपचाप खाया, जो काम है उसको किया। शाम को चैंटिंग है, फिर शाम को चैंटिंग पे आ जाओ। अगर सुबह की चैंटिंग और शाम की चैंटिंग से आपकी साधना बिगड़ जाती है तो इसका मतलब आपने कुछ सीखा नहीं है अभी। जब सुबह शाम की जो हमारी सत्र होते हैं उसमें क्या करते हैं हम? भगवान की भगवान बुद्ध धम्म संघ की वंदना करते हैं और जो भी काम करते हैं सब कुशल काम करते हैं। तो उससे तुम्हारी समाधि कैसे कम हो जाती है? अगर तुमको लगता है कि मीटिंग में जाने से तुम्हारी दिक्कत हो रही है तो दोबारा ध्यान से देखो, मीटिंग नहीं है तुमको दिक्कत करती है, ये तुम अपने आप को परेशान करते हो। अगर मीटिंग में नहीं भी जाओगे तब भी तुम उतना ही डिस्ट्रैक्टेड और परेशान रहोगे। तो आपको सीखना है कि किस तरह से प्रज्ञापूर्वक रिफ्लेक्शन किया जा सके और मन को होलसम स्टेट में रखा जा सके, कुशल स्थिति में रखा जा सके। वास्तव में क्या होता है कि तुम मन को बाहर जाने देते हो और वो इधर उधर जो चीजें हैं उनमें उलझ जाता है। जब आप यहाँ बौद्ध विहार में आए हो तो अपना मन निश्चित करके आओ कि यहाँ पे मुझे रहना है और साधना करनी है, चाहे लोग आए या ना आए, दूसरे लोग साधना ठीक से करें चाहे ना करें, ये उनका काम है। हाँ, अगर आप यहाँ प्रसन्न नहीं है तो कहीं और जाना चाहें तो जा सकते हैं। यहाँ रहना है तो ठीक से प्रैक्टिस करनी होगी, क्योंकि अगर एक भी साधक, एक भी भिक्षु बहुत अच्छी तरह से काम करता है तो बाकी सबके लिए बहुत अच्छा उदाहरण बनता है। वो उसको देखते हैं और उसके उदाहरण के आधार पर विचार करते हैं कि जब ये कर सकता है तो हम क्यों नहीं कर सकते। अपनी वाणी पे संयमित रखो और जैसा निश्चित किया है समय भी वाणी पे भी कंट्रोल रखो और भोजन पे भी कंट्रोल रखो। आपसे लोग कहेंगे अजान ये ले लीजिए, भंते ये ले लीजिए, लेकिन आपको उसको महत्व देने की जरूरत नहीं है। दिक्कत ये है कि आप अपने मन को बाहर जाने देते हो और फिर वो इन बातों में आके उलझ जाता है। जब मैं टुडांग पे रहता था बहुत पहले, तो मैं तो कहीं भी किसी गांव की किसी शहर की कहीं भी मोनेस्ट्री में रहने को तैयार रहता था, क्योंकि जब ट्रैवल कर रहे हैं जब तो अकेले हैं और अलग अलग तरह की मोनेस्ट्रीज के थ्रू जाते हैं। तो मैं यही अपने मन में एक वर्स रिसाइट करता था, शुद्धि अशुद्धि पश्चत। प्योरिटी या इम्प्योरिटी जो है वो आदमी को अपने आप जाननी होती है। ये एक प्रोटेक्शन का काम करता है और एक रिफ्लेक्शन का भी तरीका है, क्योंकि आपको अपनी इंटेग्रिटी पे ही विश्वास करना है। जब आप ऐसे स्थान से गुजर रहे हैं जहाँ पहले कभी नहीं गए, तो आपको चूज करना पड़ता है कहाँ पे जाकर रात को रहें। भगवान ने सिखाया है हमें कि ऐसी जगह रहो जहाँ शांत हो, लेकिन अगर उपलब्ध नहीं है तो क्या करेंगे। कई बार जरूरी ऐसा हो जाता है कि आपको कई दिनों तक या कई महीनों तक ऐसी जगह रहना पड़ता है मोनेस्ट्री के अंदर जहाँ शांति नहीं है। तो आप बाहर की शांति को छोड़ के अपने भीतर की शांति को बनाए रखो, क्योंकि अगर बाहर की शांति की खोज करते रहोगे तो टुडोंग में तो कहीं ऐसी जगह मिलना बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाएगा। जहाँ जगह मिलती है वहीं रहो और वहाँ पे शांति से रहना सीखो। भगवान ने सिखाया है कि परिस्थिति और समय के हिसाब से अपने आप को ढाल लेना चाहिए और भिक्षु और भिक्षुनियों को इधर उधर घूमते नहीं रहना चाहिए। तो इसलिए आपको अपने मन को और आपके अपनी चेतना को, अपने इंटेंशंस को जानते रहना चाहिए। क्योंकि आप जब चल रहे हैं तो अधिकतर जगह वही चीज होगी, जो एक जगह होगी वही दूसरी जगह भी होगी। हाँ, कई बार रास्ते में चलते हुए बीमार हो जाएंगे, मलेरिया हो जाएगा, आपको डॉक्टर को देखना होगा, दवाइयाँ लेनी होगी, और फिर जब ये सब होगा तो बहुत जल्दी ही मन एकदम बेचैन हो जाएगा। तो जो अच्छी साधना का जो सीक्रेट है वो यही है कि धम्म के अनुसार जीवन जियो। एक समाधिठी हो, एक राइट व्यू हो, वो बहुत आवश्यक। ये कोई कॉम्प्लिकेटेड चीज नहीं है। आपका मतलब यही है कि आप अपने मन को निरंतरता से इन्वेस्टिगेट करते रहें। तो तुम क्या सोचा, क्या करोगे? टुडोंग करना चाहोगे तो देखो, करके देखो कैसा रहता है। हो सकता है कि आप घूमने से परेशान हो जाओ और छोड़ दो, और हो सकता है कि आपको घूमना अच्छा लगे और चलते रहो। सब चीजें अनिश्चित हैं, करके देखना चाहिए। और जब आप साधना करते हैं तो इन चीजों पे रिफ्लेक्ट करना चाहिए। जो आपकी अपनी तृष्णाएं हैं, इच्छाएं, उनके विरुद्ध जाना चाहिए और एक फिक्स्ड व्यू बना के मुझे ये करना ही है समझ के देखना चाहिए। इंटेंशन क्या है मेरी, मैं क्यों जाना चाहता हूँ, उसको समझना चाहिए। किसी भी फिक्स्ड व्यू को साथ अटैच करना ठीक नहीं। हमेशा इन्वेस्टिगेट करते रहना चाहिए कि क्या इंटेंशन है मेरे इस काम करने की। तब आप सारे सत्य को अपने आप जान पाएंगे। और तो उस स्थिति में जो भी आप डिसीजन करोगे वो सम्यक दृष्टि के हिसाब से होगा और धर्म के अनुकूल होगा। चाहे आप टुडोंग में जाओ या मोनेस्ट्री में रहो, मुख्य बात ये कि समझदारी से रिफ्लेक्ट करके जाओ। मेरी तरफ से ना तुम्हें कोई मनाही है और ना ही कोई आग्रह है कि तुम टुडोंग पे जाओ। और अगर जाना है तो इस हद तक चलते रहो जब तक बिल्कुल थक ना जाओ। जब मैं छोटा था तो पहाड़ देखता था तो बहुत अच्छा लगता था और मैं चालू हो जाता था। आजकल जब देखता हूँ तो शरीर जो है थकने लगता है कि मेरे बस का नहीं। अब कोई एंथुसियाज्म नहीं रह गया जैसे पहले था पहाड़ों पे घूमने, टुडोंग में जाने का। पहले मैं सोचता था कि मैं पहाड़ पे ही रहूं तो शायद सारा जीवन वहीं रह लूंगा। सब निश्चित है। भगवान ने यही सिखाया कि इस समय क्या हो रहा है मन में, उसको जानना चाहिए। टुडोंग तभी करो जब तुम्हें ये लगता है कि सचमुच में ठीक है तुम्हारे लिए। मैं ना तुम्हें मना कर रहा हूँ, ना ही तुम्हें जाने के लिए परमिशन दे रहा हूँ। अपने आप निर्धारित करो। ये याद रखो कि टुडोंग जो है कोई एक्साइटमेंट और साइट सीइंग के लिए नहीं जा रहे हैं, साधना को पुष्ट करने के लिए जा रहे हैं। ये जो पर्पस है उसका जानने का, उसको हमेशा याद रखो। तो जब भी जाने की प्लानिंग करने लगो तो ये सवाल अपने आप से पूछते रहो। पर्वतों में रहना एक अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस हो सकता है, मैंने खुद बहुत किया है ऐसा, लेकिन वो तभी होगा जब सम्यक दृष्टि होगी। क्योंकि ऐसा भी नहीं हो सकता है कि आप पहाड़ पे ऊपर रह रहे हो और भोजन के लिए नीचे जा रहे हो और जब तक भोजन लेके आए और वापस आए तब तक दोपहर का टाइम हो गया। तो ये सब चीजें भी देखनी चाहिए। एक्चुअली ये ज्यादा उपयुक्त रहेगा कि इस मोनेस्ट्री, जैसे कि मोनेस्ट्री के बाहर गांव है, वहां तो जाओ, भिक्षाटन करके आओ, भोजन खाओ, और फिर जब काफी एनर्जी बनी रहेगी तो साधना कर पाओगे। अगर भोजन इकट्ठा करने में ही थक गए तो फिर साधना की दिक्कत हो सकती है। भोजन करने के बाद तुरंत जाके सो जाना ठीक नहीं है। कई बार जब मुझे बहुत लंबा चलना पड़ता था तो वापस आते आते देर हो जाती थी, तो मैं रास्ते में ही जंगल में ही कहीं बैठ के खाना खा लेता था। अब मैं सोचता हूँ क्या ये सचमुच में इतना एफर्ट करने की जरूरत थी क्या? क्या ज्यादा अच्छा नहीं होता कि मैं किसी गांव के पास रह लेता और वहीं से अपना एनर्जी बचा के रखता ताकि साधना ज्यादा अच्छी तरह से कर पाए? हाँ, हर एक के व्यूज अलग अलग हो सकते हैं, लेकिन जब आप इन्वेस्टिगेट करोगे, अपने चित्त को जान के करोगे तो अच्छी बात है। ना तो मैं टुडांग पे जाने को बहुत प्रशंसा करता हूँ, ना ही ना जाने पर प्रशंसा करता हूँ। प्रशंसा तो उनकी होनी चाहिए जिनकी सम्यक दृष्टि है, वो चाहे मोनेस्ट्री में रहें चाहे टुडांग में जाए। फिर प्रश्नोत्तर से प्रश्न था कि मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूंगा कि अलग अलग टेम्परामेंट के लिए किस किस तरह के साधना का ऑब्जेक्ट होना चाहिए। मैंने आनापान का अभ्यास कई किया बुद्धों के साथ साथ, लेकिन कभी भी शांत नहीं हो पाया। फिर मैंने मरणानुसति की, फिर भी उससे कुछ खास लाभ नहीं मिला। खंडों पे भी काम किया तो मैं अब सब बिल्कुल थक गया हूँ। तो अजान कहते ठीक है, सब छोड़ दो। अगर आपकी प्रज्ञा ही थक गई है तो आपको सब त्याग कर देना चाहिए। फिर कहते हैं कि जैसे ही मेरे को थोड़ी सी शांति मिलने लगती है, बहुत सारी पुरानी बातें सारी याद में आने लगती हैं, मन को डिस्टर्ब होने लगता है। तो अजानचा कहते हैं यही तो बात मैं कहना चाहता हूँ, ये सब अनिश्चित है। अपने आप को समझो कि साधना क्या होगा, ये अनिश्चित है। अनिश्चितता के ऊपर रिफ्लेक्शन करना ही मुख्य साधना है, और इस रिफ्लेक्शन को निरंतर अपने अंदर बनाए रखो। क्योंकि अगर मन शांत भी हो जाए, समाधि भी आ जाए, वो भी अनिश्चित है, न जाने कब समाप्त हो जाए। मन में जो चीजें उठती हैं उनके साथ उनमें उलझो मत, उनको देखो और जाने दो। मन की स्थितियों को सीरियसली नहीं रहना चाहिए। तुमने ये सुना नहीं क्या, विज्ञानम अनिच्चम? अर्थ क्या है कि जो इंद्रिय विज्ञान है, इंद्रिय सेंस कॉन्शियसनेस है, अनित्य है। तो तुम कैसे एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हो हमेशा बनी रहेगी? मुख्य बात यह है कि हमारी सजगता बनी रहे और सती बनी रहे कि चीजें ऐसी होती हैं, अनिश्चित है, बदलती रहती हैं। तो तुम्हें मालूम है किस तरह से इस तरह की अवेयरनेस और इंसाइट से ध्यान करना है? तो कहते नहीं, मुझे नहीं मालूम। अजानचा कहते हैं तो अनित्यता को जानो, उसको इन्वेस्टिगेट करो। कितने समय तक मैं काम और शांति की इस मन की स्थितियां बनी रह सकती हैं? मन की शांत स्थितियां और डिस्ट्रैक्शन दोनों ही अनिश्चित है, दोनों ही अनित्य है। जब साधना करने से मन शांत होता है तो तो वो लगता है बहुत अच्छा काम हो रहा है, वो भी अनिश्चित है। इस बात को समझने से इंसाइट आती है, सिर्फ शांति होने से इंसाइट नहीं आती। थोड़ा थोड़ा अपनी तरफ सेट कर रहा हूँ ताकि कंफ्यूजन ना रहे। मन में क्या हो रहा है उसको समझते रहो, जानते रहो, उस हद तक की गहराई से अनित्य बोध पुष्ट हो जाए। ये जो तुम कह रहे हो कि आनापान से मन शांत नहीं हो रहा, बुद्धों से शांत नहीं हो रहा, उसका मुख्य कारण यही है कि जब मन डिस्ट्रैक्ट होता है तो तुम उसके साथ अटैच हो जाते हो, उसकी अनित्यता को नहीं समझते, उसको रिफ्लेक्शन नहीं करते। चाहे मन शांत है चाहे नहीं हो, कोई इसमें इन्वॉल्व होने की जरूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि वो आपको मन की शांति भी आपको डिल्यूट कर सकती है और आप उसको अत्यधिक महत्व देना शुरू कर देंगे। जब मन शांत है तो जान लिया शांत है, और जब मन डिस्ट्रैक्टेड है तो जान लिया डिस्ट्रैक्टेड है, बस। और इन दोनों स्थितियों से अनित्य बोध पुष्ट करना है। जब आपने इस प्रकार की अंतर्दृष्टि डेवलप कर ली है तो आत्मभाव अपने आप कोलैप्स हो जाता है, और जैसे ही आप उसको इन्वेस्टिगेट करते हैं और समझ में आने लगता है कि जब मन एजिटेटेड है तो हमारी सेंस ऑफ सेल्फ जो है वो बढ़ जाती है, और जब उसको इन्वेस्टिगेट करते हैं तो अपने आप कम होती चली जाती है। ऐसे जैसे फूला हुआ गुब्बारा है, उसको पंक्चर कर दिया, उसकी सारी हवा निकल गई। शायद यही है कि तुम अपने जो डिल्यूटेड थिंकिंग है उसको कैप्चर नहीं कर पाते हो, और इसलिए मेंटल एजिटेशन जैसे होती है उसी के इर्द गिर्द घूमते रहते हो। हमेशा अपने को प्रश्न करते रहो अपने इस परिस्थिति के बारे में, और जो कहाँ अटैचमेंट हो रही है उसको गहराई से देखो। जब मन प्रपंच में भाव दौड़ रहा है उसको जाने दो और देखते रहो। तुमने शायद एग्जामिनेशन करना, इन्वेस्टिगेट करने की सादा अभ्यास नहीं है, तो इसलिए उसकी कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि आप देखते रहो कि क्या हो रहा है। जब मैं प्रवचन देता हूँ तो तुम हमेशा अंदर अंदर कंप्लेंट करते रहते हो, ये बूढ़ा आदमी हमेशा अनित्य बोध ही बोलता रहता है, अनिश्चितता की बात करता रहता है। इसकी तो एक ही टीचिंग है, सब कुछ अनिश्चित है। मतलब तुम इससे फेड अप हो जाते हो तो फिर साधन ठीक से कैसे कर पाओगे। इसलिए इस टीचिंग को याद कर लो, अपने चित्त के अंदर स्टोर करके रखो, और तब जाके टूडांग की बातें करो। मैं टूडांग में जाना चाहता हूँ। मानता हूँ कि समाधि का अभ्यास करना अच्छी बात है। आप क्या इन चेतो विमुक्ति और पन्या विमुक्ति से फेमिलियर हैं? उनके अर्थ समझते हो? विमुक्ति का अर्थ होता है लिबरेशन। लिबरेशन किन से? मन के विकारों से। और ये दो तरह से हो सकती है। चेतोमिथि जो कि समाधि के डेवलप करने के बाद आती है, जो समाधि को खूब परफेक्ट कर लिया और उसके बाद चित्त की शुद्धि का काम किया। पहले तो समाधि से विकारों को दबा दिया और फिर उस समाधि का इस्तेमाल करके अंतर्दृष्टि डेवलप की उनके अनित्य बोध की। पन्या विमुक्ति का मतलब है कि समाधि बस उस लेवल तक ही की जिससे कि हम इतना सपोर्ट हो कि हमारी अंतर्दृष्टि डेवलप हो सके। ये दोनों तरह की समाधि की जो विमुक्तियां हैं वो एक जंगल में अलग अलग तरह के जैसे पेड़ होते हैं उस तरह के हैं। कुछ पेड़ ऐसे होते हैं जो अधिक पानी देने से बड़े होते हैं और कुछ ऐसे होते हैं जिनको ज्यादा पानी दोगे तो बिगड़ जाएंगे, खराब हो जाएंगे, उनके साथ बहुत कम पानी की जरूरत होती है। अजीब लगता है ना, लेकिन ये सत्य है। ये जो पाइन ट्री वहां पे हो, कहते हैं इस पाइन ट्री को देखो तुमने, ये पानी कहाँ से लाता है, इतनी बड़ी बड़ी ब्रांचेस कैसे बनती हैं। बाकी पेड़ों को तो बहुत पानी जरूरत होती है इतना साइज बड़ा होने के लिए, क्योंकि पेड़ अलग अलग तरह के हैं। इसी तरह से लोगों के चरित्र भी अलग अलग तरह के होते हैं। तो जो विमुक्ति है उसके लिए बहुत समाधि की भी आवश्यकता है और प्रज्ञा की भी आवश्यकता है। और उनमें आपस में कोई भेद समझते हो तुम? तो बिल्कुल कहते हैं नहीं, मुझे नहीं समझते। तो फिर अगर नहीं है भेद तो उनको अलग अलग नाम क्यों दिए गए? ये चैतो विमुक्ति और पन्या विमुक्ति क्यों गई? तो भिक्षु कहता है जस्ट कहने की बात है, वर्बल है, फर्क है। गुड, ये बात तो ठीक है। तो अगर तुम इसको देख पाते हो, और नहीं, क्योंकि नहीं तो अगर तुम इन दोनों का डिस्टिंक्शन करके उसको अति ज्यादा सत्य की ओर से आपका ग्रिप हट जाता है। हाँ, वास्तव में इन दोनों में थोड़ा फर्क तो है ही, एम्फेसिस का फर्क है। एक में सब समाधि का अभ्यास ज्यादा करने की जरूरत है, दूसरे में कम। एक वो उदाहरण दे रहे थे कि एक जगह में गांव टोडांग में रह रहा था जहाँ पे एक बहुत बड़े पेड़ थे, एक वो अबंडन मोनेस्ट्री थी और वहाँ पे पेड़ भी लगे हुए थे। तो मैं वहाँ बैठ रहा था, तो वहाँ पे कोई फलों का पेड़ था। तो एक गाँव वाला आया कि बास्केट की मैं ये फल ले लूँ। तो मैंने कहा भैया मैं इसका ओनर नहीं हूँ, मैं तुम्हें परमिशन नहीं दे सकता, ना ही मैं मना कर सकता हूँ, तुम्हें खुद डिसाइड करना है। तो ये उदाहरण दे रहे थे कि जो सती थी, जो माइंडफुलनेस थी, इतनी स्ट्रांग थी कि मैं उसको उपयुक्त आंसर दे सका। तो इसी तरह से हमको सती डेवलप करनी चाहिए। फिर वो पूछते हैं कि तुम्हें ये चरित्र या टेम्परामेंट के बारे में मालूम है? तो मेरे को कहता है मुझे कुछ पक्का नहीं मालूम क्या है। कहते हैं मन एक चीज है और टेम्परामेंट दूसरी चीज है, और विजडम तीसरा एक और फैकल्टी है हमारी। तो किस तरह से इसको ट्रेन करेंगे, उनको समझेंगे। एक आदमी साधक होता है जिसमें बहुत काम वासना की हैबिट है, जनरली मैन उस तरह घूमता रहता है। दूसरा है जिसका हमेशा देशात्मक प्रवृत्ति है। तीसरा है जो हमेशा कंफ्यूजन में ही रहता है। कोई है जो बहुत इंटेलिजेंट है। इस तरह से तो अलग अलग टेम्परामेंट रहते हैं और उसके अनुसार साधना की जा सकती है। तो तुम 6 साल से भी मॉन्क रहे हो तो प्रोबेबली लगता है मुझे तुम अपने विचारों को मूड्स के पीछे ही दौड़ते फिरते हो। काफी समय से उनको चेज कर रहे हो। अगर तुम अकेला रहना चाहते हो तो कुछ कोशिश कर लो, लेकिन कम्युनिटी में रहते हो वो भी ठीक है, कोई गलत, दोनों में से कोई गलत नहीं है। ये बात सच है कि अच्छी जगह वही है शांति, जहाँ शांति हो बाहर से और डिस्टर्बेंस ना हो। लेकिन अगर ऐसा स्पेस अवेलेबल नहीं है तो कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता, आपकी साधना खत्म नहीं हो जाएगी। आप अपनी चित्त को बाहर भटकने मत दो, अपने विचारों को इकट्ठा करके अपनी एनर्जी को फोकस करके रखो और सारा ध्यान अंतर्मुखी होकर साधना करते रहो। तो पुण्यानुसति के लिए टाइम नहीं रहा, काफी प्रवचन को ट्रांसलेशन में काफी समय लग गया, तो संक्षेप में समापन करते हैं। सर्वे सत्ता सुखी होन्तु सर्वे होन्तु सुखिनो सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा किञ्चित् पापमागमः न किञ्चित् शोकमागमः मा किञ्चित् दुःखमागमः भवतु सर्वमङ्गलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वबुद्धानुभावेन सदा सुखी भवन्तु ते भवतु सर्वमङ्गलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वधर्मानुभावेन सदा सुखी भवन्तु ते भवतु सर्वमङ्गलं रक्षन्तु सर्वदेवता सर्वसङ्घानुभावेन सदा सुखी भवन्तु ते अरहं सम्मा सम्बुद्धो भगवा बुद्धं भगवन्तं अभिवादे स्वाक्खतो भगवता धम्मं नमस्सामि सुपटिपन्नो भगवतो सावक संघो संघं नमामि नमस्कार नमस्कार